In 1917, Russia stood at the edge of total collapse. For centuries, the vast empire had been ruled by the Romanov dynasty, a monarchy that commanded armies, collected immense taxes, and accumulated one of the world's largest treasuries of gold. By the early 20th century, the Russian Empire's gold reserves were second only to France's, estimated at nearly 1,200 metric tons. This golden fortune was not simply a symbol of imperial grandeur. It was the backbone of the Russian economy, the guarantor of its currency, and a weapon of influence in international politics. But in the chaos of 1917, this treasure seemed to vanish into thin air. The Russian Revolution erupted in February, when bread riots in Petrograd spiraled into a mass uprising. Tsar Nicholas II abdicated, ending over 300 years of Romanov rule. The provisional government struggled to maintain control, but with the World War raging and revolutionary fervor spreading, its grip was weak. By October, the Bolsheviks seized power under the leadership of Vladimir Lenin, promising peace, land, and bread. Yet as political factions clashed, civil war loomed, and the fate of the empire's immense gold reserves became a mystery that still baffles historians. What exactly happened to this colossal hoard? Some claim the Bolsheviks used it to fund their revolution and by international support. Others argue it was stolen by foreign powers, lost in the chaos of civil war, or hidden in secret vaults never to be found. The disappearance of the Russian gold reserves in 1917 remains one of history's great financial mysteries. It is a tale of revolution and betrayal, of trains filled with treasure crossing a war-torn land, of soldiers and foreign armies chasing not just victory, but unimaginable wealth. To unravel this enigma, we must step into the turbulent world of 1917 Russia and trace the path of the lost treasure. This story is not only about missing gold. It is about power, survival, and the collapse of one of history's greatest empires. In this series, we will follow the journey of the Russian gold reserves from the glittering halls of the Romanovs to the battlefields of the Civil War, from secret vaults to whispered rumors of treasure trains vanishing into the Siberian wilderness. The gold did not just represent wealth. It represented the very future of Russia. Whoever controlled it could dictate the outcome of the revolution. Whoever lost it risked watching their empire crumble. And so, as we step back into 1917, we begin with the Romanovs, the rulers of Russia whose empire was built on both the promise and the peril of gold. For centuries, Russia's wealth had been tied to the strength of its monarchy. The Romanovs, ruling since 1613, had built one of the most powerful dynasties in the world. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the empire stretched across 2 continents, commanding vast natural resources: timber, oil, coal, and above all, gold. Under Tsar Nicholas II, Russia had accumulated one of the world's largest hoards of bullion, estimated at over 1,200 metric tons, worth billions of dollars in today's value. This gold was stored in multiple locations, but its most famous vaults were in Petrograd and Moscow, with large reserves transferred eastward to Kazan and Omsk. Some of it was even safeguarded deep in the Ural Mountains in Siberia, far from Europe's battlefields. Russia's strategy was clear. If the empire were ever invaded from the west, the wealth of the nation would not fall easily into enemy hands. Gold was more than wealth. It was power. Russia's gold reserves allowed the Tsar to secure loans from foreign allies during the First World War. French and British bankers readily accepted Russian bonds, knowing that they were backed by massive stores of bullion. This financial muscle was crucial in sustaining the Russian war effort, feeding soldiers at the front, and keeping the war machine moving. Without this gold, Russia's ability to fight would have collapsed far earlier. But the empire's treasure was not simply functional. It was also symbolic. Glittering ornaments of the court, golden domes of Orthodox cathedrals, and the fabled Faberge eggs reflected the opulence of the dynasty. For the common people, however, such wealth only highlighted the deep inequality of the empire. While peasants starved in villages and soldiers froze in trenches, the monarchy's immense reserves seemed like a taunting reminder of privilege and excess. When revolutionaries looked at the Romanov gold, they saw more than treasure. They saw the material foundation of oppression, the hoarded wealth of centuries that could be redistributed to fuel the revolution. To them, seizing the gold meant dismantling the old order and creating a new one. The gold also played into international intrigue. Germany, locked in war with Russia, understood that whoever controlled the treasure could change the balance of power. Whispers spread that Berlin plotted to seize Russia's gold to finance its own war effort. Meanwhile, the Allies feared that if the reserves fell into Bolshevik hands, Lenin might use the treasure to buy peace with Germany and pull Russia out of the war. By 1917, the Romanov Empire was on shaky ground. Bread riots, mutinies, and the staggering death toll of World War I had weakened the throne. As the February Revolution erupted and the Tsar abdicated, the question of the empire's gold reserves suddenly became urgent. Who controlled it? Where would it go? Would it be used to save the provisional government or to destroy it? This immense fortune, once thought of as untouchable, was suddenly at the center of a battle for Russia's future. And in the chaos that followed, the seeds of its disappearance were sown. By early 1917, Russia was a nation cracking under the weight of war and poverty. The First World War had consumed millions of soldiers, drained the economy, and brought hunger to cities. Petrograd, the capital, became a boiling cauldron of unrest. Bread lines stretched for hours, factories slowed as workers went on strike, and returning soldiers carried tales of defeat and incompetence at the front. The Romanov dynasty, once untouchable, now appeared fragile and disconnected from the people it claimed to rule. In February, it all came to a breaking point. Protests began with women demanding bread, but within days they escalated into full-blown strikes. Soldiers, weary of being ordered to fire on civilians, began siding with the crowds. By March, Tsar Nicholas II was forced to abdicate, ending 3 centuries of Romanov rule. Russia was suddenly without a monarch, its empire crumbling around it. Into this vacuum stepped the provisional government, a coalition of liberal and moderate socialist leaders who promised reform and democracy. Yet, from its first day, the government faced insurmountable challenges. It vowed to continue Russia's involvement in the war, a deeply unpopular decision that drained resources and fueled anger. Meanwhile, in the background, revolutionary groups, most notably the Bolsheviks under Vladimir Lenin, plotted their own rise to power. Amid this political turmoil, the fate of Russia's immense gold reserves became a critical issue. The provisional government still controlled the treasury, but its ability to protect it was fragile. Gold shipments continued to be used to pay debts and purchase supplies from allies, but with the government weak and its enemies growing stronger, questions arose. Could it hold on to the treasure? For Lenin and the Bolsheviks, the gold represented an opportunity. They understood that whoever controlled the reserves controlled the financial future of Russia. Gold could buy weapons, fund propaganda, and win international recognition. More importantly, in a revolutionary state where the economy teetered on collapse, gold was one of the few stable assets left. As the summer of 1917 wore on, tensions escalated. Soldiers deserted in droves, peasants seized land, and strikes paralyzed the cities. The provisional government, led by Alexander Kerensky, tried desperately to maintain order, but it lacked legitimacy. At the same time, the Bolsheviks expanded their influence through Soviets, workers' and soldiers' councils that began to rival the government itself. By October, the stage was set for the Bolshevik takeover. With slogans like peace, land, and bread, Lenin's party seized Petrograd in a nearly bloodless coup. The provisional government collapsed, and the Bolsheviks declared themselves the new rulers of Russia. But while they now held political power, the pressing question remained. Could they seize and secure the nation's gold before their enemies, both foreign and domestic, stripped it away? The outbreak of revolution had destroyed the monarchy and toppled the provisional government. Yet in the chaos, the gold reserves became more than treasure. They became a weapon. Whoever captured them could shape the destiny of Russia itself. And as the Bolsheviks took power, the gold began to move in mysterious ways, setting the stage for one of history's greatest financial enigmas. When the Bolsheviks seized power in October 1917, they inherited not just a crumbling empire, but also the colossal responsibility of safeguarding Russia's vast gold reserves. Lenin and his comrades understood that this treasure was more than symbolic. It was the very lifeblood of their new regime. Without it, their promises of peace, land, and bread would remain empty words. With it, they could purchase loyalty, arm their forces, and bargain with foreign governments. The first challenge the Bolsheviks faced was control. Russia's gold was not concentrated in a single vault, but spread across multiple locations. Some reserves were in Petrograd and Moscow, but significant amounts had been deliberately moved eastward during the war, away from the German advance. Deposits in Kazan, Omsk, and other Siberian cities meant that the treasure was scattered across thousands of miles, in regions now slipping into chaos. The Bolsheviks immediately sought to centralize control. They declared the gold reserves property of the people and placed them under the authority of the new Soviet state. But their grip was tenuous. Civil war was breaking out, with the White Armies, coalitions of monarchists, liberals, and anti-Bolshevik socialists rising to challenge Lenin's rule. Foreign powers, alarmed by the Bolsheviks' radical ideology, intervened by sending troops, money, and weapons to the Whites. In this fractured landscape, the Russian gold reserves became not just a resource, but a prize to be fought over. One of the Bolsheviks' most strategic moves was to use gold as leverage in diplomacy. They knew that ending Russia's involvement in the First World War was vital. In March 1918, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk was signed with Germany, pulling Russia out of the war at a staggering territorial cost. Some historians argue that part of the payment for peace included secret transfers of Russian gold to Germany, shipments that were never fully documented. Whether this was a deliberate act of survival or an act of betrayal remains a subject of debate. At the same time, the Bolsheviks used gold to stabilize their fragile economy. They paid workers in bullion, financed propaganda campaigns, and secretly smuggled shipments abroad to buy weapons. Gold trains rolled across the country under Red Army Guard, moving treasure from vulnerable vaults into the Bolsheviks' hands. But with the Whites advancing and foreign forces tightening their grip on Siberia, not all of these shipments reached their destination. Some were captured, others vanished, and a few became the stuff of legend. The golden question haunted both sides of the Civil War. Who truly controlled Russia's treasure? For the Bolsheviks, retaining the reserves meant survival. For the Whites, seizing them offered a chance to crush the revolution. For foreign powers, the gold was a bargaining chip to ensure repayment of debts or compensation for intervention. By the end of 1918, the gold had become the ultimate prize in a war that was tearing Russia apart. And soon, it would embark on one of the most mysterious journeys in modern history. Loaded onto trains, hidden in remote vaults, and pursued across the endless Siberian landscape. As Russia plunged deeper into civil war, the nation's gold reserve became both a blessing and a curse. By 1918, the Bolsheviks faced uprisings across the country, with the White Armies advancing from multiple fronts and foreign powers supporting their cause. The Bolsheviks controlled the major cities of Petrograd and Moscow, but the vast hinterlands, Siberia, the Urals, and beyond, were contested battlegrounds. It was in this climate of uncertainty that one of the most enduring legends of Russian history was born, the story of the Train of Gold. With the advance of anti-Bolshevik forces threatening the treasuries in central Russia, Lenin and his government ordered massive shipments of gold reserves to be moved eastward. The logic was simple. Siberia, far from the European fronts, was more defensible, and from there, the treasure could be used to purchase foreign supplies or be safeguarded until Red Army secured a nation. Enormous convoys were assembled, heavily guarded trains carrying chests of gold bullion, coins, and even priceless Romanov treasures. Witnesses described entire trains loaded with nothing but gold, escorted by armed guards and secret police. These shipments traveled along the Trans-Siberian Railway, the great steel artery that linked Moscow to Vladivostok on the Pacific coast. But in the chaos of war, not all of these trains reached their destinations. Some were captured by advancing white forces. Others simply disappeared, swallowed by the vast Siberian wilderness. Tales spread of entire shipments vanishing overnight, of treasure hidden in underground bunkers, or buried near remote railway stations. One of the most famous episodes occurred in Kazan in 1918. The city, home to a large portion of the reserves, was seized by the White Armies, who took possession of a massive amount of gold. Estimates suggest that nearly half of Russia's treasure, around 650 metric tons, fell into their hands. From there, the white leaders attempted to move it eastward, guarded by the powerful and independent Czech Legion, a force of former prisoners of war who had turned into an organized army. The Czech Legion's involvement only deepened the mystery. Initially allies of the Bolsheviks, the Czechs rebelled in 1918 after disputes with Soviet authorities. Seizing parts of the Trans-Siberian Railway, they suddenly found themselves in control of key sections of the gold shipments. Reports suggest that they used some of the treasure to fund their own evacuation eastward, selling gold to foreign powers and bankers in exchange for passage home. Was this evacuation a desperate measure to save the reserves, or outright theft by those who guarded them? Historians still debate. Some believe the Bolsheviks deliberately allowed portions of the gold to fall into white or foreign hands in exchange for temporary alliances. Others insist that much of the treasure was stolen, melted down, and quietly absorbed into foreign economies. What is certain is that by the end of 1918, the whereabouts of much of Russia's gold had become uncertain. Some of it was in Bolshevik hands, some under control of the whites, and some scattered in mysterious transactions across Siberia and beyond. The train of gold became more than a logistical operation. It became a symbol of Russia's fractured future. Every faction that touched it left behind rumors, contradictions, and unanswered questions. And as the Civil War intensified, the gold's journey grew even more complicated. If one group embodied the strange twist of the Russian Civil War and the mystery of the missing gold, it was the Czech Legion, originally formed from Czech and Slovak prisoners of war who wanted independence from Austria-Hungary. They joined the Russian army in hopes of fighting the Central Powers. By 1917, the Legion numbered tens of thousands of trained soldiers scattered across Russia. At first, the Czechs supported the revolutionaries, hoping to secure safe passage through Russia to join the Allied forces on the Western Front. But as Lenin consolidated Bolshevik power, relations soured. Disputes with Soviet authorities erupted into open conflict in 1918, when a violent clash at Chelyabinsk sparked a full-scale rebellion. The Czech Legion, well-armed and disciplined, seized control of large portions of the Trans-Siberian Railway, Russia's main artery of transportation and communication. This put them in a unique position. They controlled not only vital transport routes, but also access to the treasure trains carrying Russia's gold reserves eastward. When the whites captured Kazan in August 1918, the gold reserves, nearly 650 metric tons, fell into their hands. But it was the Czech Legion that provided the muscle to guard and transport it. Effectively, the Czechs became custodians of Russia's lost fortune. The Legion's motives remain controversial. Some accounts suggest that the Czechs faithfully guarded the gold on behalf of the anti-Bolshevik white forces, hoping it could finance their shared cause. Others argue that the Legion used the treasure for its own purposes, selling off chunks of bullion and coins to foreign buyers in Siberia, China, and even Japan to fund their evacuation. As the Civil War dragged on, the Legion's priorities shifted from fighting Bolshevism to ensuring their own escape. Stranded thousands of miles from Europe, they negotiated with both the whites and foreign powers to secure ships from Vladivostok. Gold, in this context, became not just a resource but a bargaining chip. Rumors spread that the Legion melted down bars, traded coins by the chest, and even buried portions of the treasure along their route. Foreign powers, particularly Japan and the United States, were quick to take advantage. Allied intervention forces in Siberia offered protection to the Legion and its treasure-laden trains. Banking agents from Tokyo, Shanghai, and Harbin reportedly purchased Russian bullion at discounted rates. Some shipments, historians argue, disappeared into Japanese vaults, never to return to Russia. The mystery deepens because records from this period are incomplete, contradictory, or deliberately falsified. Official White Army reports insisted that most of the gold remained intact under their control. Soviet sources, eager to paint the Czechs as thieves, accused them of plundering the reserves and selling Russia's wealth abroad. Neutral observers offer conflicting testimonies, with some claiming to have seen chest after chest unloaded in Vladivostok, while others swore that much of it vanished long before. By 1920, as the Czech Legion finally evacuated from Vladivostok, much of the gold they once guarded had simply disappeared. Some undoubtedly remained with the whites. Some made its way into Bolshevik hands after victories in Siberia. But large portions were unaccounted for. The treasure trail left behind by the Czech Legion was muddled, confused, and riddled with contradictions. Yet, one thing was clear. Wherever the gold went, it shaped the fate of the Civil War. And as the fighting intensified, new contenders rose to claim their share of the vanished wealth. The Russian Civil War was not a simple battle between Reds and Whites. It was a sprawling, chaotic conflict with multiple factions, shifting loyalties and foreign interventions. Yet at the heart of many campaigns lay one unifying objective: control the gold. For the White armies, seizing Russia's reserves was both a matter of survival and a promise of legitimacy. Whoever held the gold could pay troops, buy supplies from foreign allies, and claim to be the rightful guardian of Russia's future. One of the key figures in this struggle was Admiral Alexander Kolchak, the self-declared supreme ruler of Russia. A former naval officer and committed anti-Bolshevik, Kolchak rose to prominence in Siberia after 1918, when he assumed leadership of the fragmented White movement. At his disposal was a staggering fortune: the Kazan treasure captured from the Bolsheviks and transported eastward, guarded in part by the Czech Legion. For a time, Kolchak's regime controlled what was arguably the largest portion of the Russian gold reserves. Some historians estimate that under his authority lay more than 650 metric tons of bullion and coinage, enough to sustain his armies and impress foreign powers. Kolchak used the treasure to purchase arms from abroad, negotiating with British, American, and Japanese agents. Yet with every transaction, more of Russia's wealth slipped into foreign hands, fueling the suspicion that the gold was being siphoned away rather than preserved. But holding the gold did not guarantee victory. Kolchak's rule was plagued by corruption, internal rivalries, and the relentless advance of the Red Army. The treasure became both a blessing and a curse. Soldiers mutinied over pay, officials skimmed profits from deals, and foreign bankers grew increasingly skeptical of Kolchak's collapsing regime. Even as he tried to present himself as Russia's savior, his dependence on gold to buy loyalty only deepened the fractures within his movement. By 1919, Kolchak's fortunes collapsed. The Red Army launched powerful offensives, retaking key cities along the Trans-Siberian Railway. Forced to retreat, Kolchak attempted to move the treasure further east. But in the chaos of retreat, entire shipments disappeared. Some were abandoned, others captured, and still others allegedly looted by Kolchak's own officers. The final blow came in early 1920. Betrayed by his allies and abandoned by the Czechs, Kolchak was arrested in Irkutsk and executed by the Bolsheviks. His gold, at least a portion still under his control, was handed over to the Soviets. Yet, by this point, no one could say with certainty how much remained. Of the 650 tons once under his command, only a fraction was ever recovered. The rest had vanished, spent, stolen, or hidden. The saga of Kolchak and the Whites illustrates the central paradox of the missing treasure. Gold offered power, but also attracted betrayal. It financed armies, but it also corrupted them. And in the end, it could not save the White cause from collapse. When Kolchak fell, the Bolsheviks reclaimed part of the reserves. But the mystery only deepened. Where had the rest gone? Was it in secret vaults, hidden along the railway, or already melted down in foreign banks? The struggle for the gold did not end with Kolchak. Instead, it entered its most mysterious phase, the moment when treasure trains vanished without a trace, leaving behind legends that endure to this day. By the early months of 1920, the Russian Civil War was still raging, but the tide had turned decisively in favor of the Bolsheviks. The Red Army, better organized and increasingly ruthless, was pushing the White forces eastward. The once mighty treasure of the Russian Empire, however, was now a fractured mystery, partly in Bolshevik vaults, partly lost in chaotic retreats, and partly in the hands of foreign allies who had no intention of returning it. The most baffling question remains: how much of the gold actually vanished? Soviet reports claim that by the time the Bolsheviks consolidated control, only a fraction of the original 1,200 metric tons was accounted for. Some of the loss could be explained: gold spent on weapons, payments to foreign powers, or captured in battles. But there were also more enigmatic disappearances. Entire trains that never arrived, shipments that vanished en route, and crates that were never inventoried again. One of the most enduring legends involves the lost gold train of Irkutsk. According to some accounts, as Admiral Kolchak retreated eastward in late 1919, several trains laden with treasure were diverted somewhere in Siberia. In the bitter cold of winter, The convoys vanished, never to be seen again. Did they derail in remote forests, their contents buried under snow and time? Were they deliberately hidden by retreating white officers, hoping to reclaim them one day? Or were they intercepted by local warlords, Cossacks, or foreign soldiers who quietly carried the bullion away? Eyewitness testimonies only deepened confusion. Some claimed to have seen treasure-laden wagons abandoned on frozen sidings, guarded by desperate soldiers who eventually scattered. Others swore that locals discovered chests of coins along the railway, looting them before fleeing into the wilderness. In one tale, a train supposedly sank while crossing a frozen river, its golden cargo entombed beneath ice and mud forever. The Czech Legion's evacuation from Vladivostok added another layer to the mystery. While the Czechs insisted they turn over most of the gold to Kolchak's government, Soviet sources accused them of smuggling vast quantities abroad. Records from banks in Japan, China, and the United States show sudden surges of Russian bullion entering circulation during this period. Evidence, perhaps, that treasure had been quietly sold off. But how much was spent, and how much simply disappeared into private pockets, remains uncertain. Even after the Bolsheviks executed Kolchak and secured Irkutsk in 1920, they could not account for all the missing treasure. Lenin's government recovered significant amounts, enough to stabilize the Soviet state and fund its economy during the early years. But Soviet records admit that hundreds of tons were unaccounted for. The fate of this missing portion has never been resolved. Was it buried in Siberia? Stolen by the Czechs? Seized by foreign powers who preferred silence over admission? Or does it still lie hidden in forgotten tunnels, caves, and rivers across Russia's vast wilderness? The disappearance of the Russian gold reserves in 1917 to 1920 was not a single event, but a series of vanishings. Piecemeal, chaotic, and shadowed by betrayal. Yet together, they form one of the greatest lost treasure mysteries of modern history. The disappearance of Russia's gold reserves has puzzled historians, treasure hunters, and conspiracy theorists for over a century. With so many conflicting accounts, incomplete records, and deliberate propaganda from all sides, the fate of the lost bullion remains uncertain. Over time, several theories have emerged, some grounded in historical evidence, others more speculative, but all intriguing. Theory 1. Seized by the Bolsheviks. According to official Soviet records, most of the gold eventually returned to Bolshevik hands. After Admiral Kolchak's capture and execution in 1920, the Red Army reportedly took possession of the bulk of the Kazan treasure. Lenin's government certainly used large amounts of gold to stabilize the Soviet economy in its early years, as well as to purchase foreign equipment and recognition. Supporters of this theory argue that the disappearance is exaggerated. While some shipments were lost, most of the treasure simply became the foundation of the Soviet state's wealth. Theory 2. Stolen by the Czech Legion. Soviet propaganda painted the Czech Legion as thieves who looted Russia's reserves as they evacuated along the Trans-Siberian Railway. Records from banks in Vladivostok, Shanghai, and even San Francisco show sudden influxes of Russian gold during this period, lending some credibility to the claim. Critics, however, argue that while the Legion likely sold portions of the treasure to fund their evacuation, they did not have capacity to steal hundreds of tons without leaving clearer evidence. Theory 3. Vanish into foreign vaults. Another possibility is that foreign interventionist powers, Japan, Britain, the United States, quietly acquired portions of the gold. Allied forces in Siberia had direct access to the treasure-laden trains, and negotiations with Kolchak often involved financial guarantees. Japan, in particular, with its strong presence in Vladivostok, has long been suspected of siphoning away Russian bullion, which then disappeared into Tokyo's financial system. For obvious diplomatic reasons, these governments never admitted to outright seizure. Theory 4. Lost in Siberia. The most romantic theory is that much of the gold still lies hidden in Russia's vast wilderness. Tales of treasure trains abandoned in the snow, shipments buried near railway stations, or entire convoys sinking into rivers feed the imagination of treasure hunters. Expeditions have been launched to search for the lost gold of Irkutsk or the Siberian treasure train, but none have yielded conclusive results. Still, given the immense size and remoteness of Siberia, it is not impossible that caches of gold remain undiscovered. Theory 5. Scattered through corruption and theft. Finally, the simplest explanation may be the most convincing. The gold was not lost in one grand event, but gradually eroded through corruption, theft, and mismanagement. Officers lining their pockets, soldiers looting abandoned shipments, and opportunistic traders buying stolen bullion could account for much of the disappearance. In times of civil war, accountability vanishes, and with it, treasure. Each theory carries weight, and the truth may lie in a combination of all of them. Some gold reached the Bolsheviks. Some was seized by whites, Czechs, and foreigners. Some was hidden or lost. And some may still be waiting, deep in the frozen wilderness, for discovery. Yet what makes this mystery endure is not just the gold itself, but what it represents. The collapse of an empire, the chaos of revolution, and the shadowy intersections of wealth and power in the making of the modern world. The story of Russia's missing treasure is not simply about gold. It is about the collapse of an empire, the violent birth of a new regime, and the way wealth can vanish in the fog of war. More than a century later, the fate of the lost bullion continues to cast a long shadow over Russian history, fueling speculation, research, and even treasure-hunting expeditions. For the Soviet Union, the gold reserves played a vital role in its survival. The Bolsheviks, once a ragtag revolutionary movement, suddenly found themselves in possession of immense wealth, at least a large portion of it. This treasure allowed Lenin's government to buy foreign recognition, import critical supplies, and stabilize a shattered economy. Without it, the Soviet state may not have endured its fragile early years. For the whites, the missing treasure was a symbol of betrayal. Kolchak's downfall and the rumors that his gold was stolen added to the tragic mythology of the lost cause. Even decades later, exiled monarchists spoke of the stolen wealth of Russia as proof that the Bolsheviks had robbed the nation, both materially and spiritually. For foreign powers, the episode is a reminder of how war reshapes global finance. Whether or not allied governments directly seize Russian bullion, the sudden appearance of gold in global markets during the Russian Civil War had ripple effects across Asia, Europe, and America. Wealth that once sat in the vaults of St. Petersburg now circulated in the treasuries of the world. But for modern treasure hunters, the gold's mystery is irresistible. Expeditions in Siberia claim to search for abandoned train cars buried in snowdrifts or sunken in rivers. Local legends speak of secret stashes hidden near Irkutsk, Omsk, or deep in the taiga. Each year, fresh rumors emerge, yet none have conclusively solved the puzzle. The enduring mystery lies not only in missing shipments, but in the very nature of revolution itself. The collapse of Tsarist Russia was chaotic, violent, and confused. Records were destroyed, officials fled, and opportunists exploited the disorder. In such a climate, treasure could simply evaporate, bit by bit, into the hands of whoever was strong enough to seize it. In the end, the truth may never be fully uncovered. The Russian Civil War scattered not only armies and governments, but also history itself. Gold shipments were lost, misreported, or hidden, and witnesses carried conflicting stories across continents. The mystery of the 1917 treasure has become less about hard fact and more about legend, a tale of empire, betrayal, and the price of power. Today, Russia's missing treasure remains one of the world's great historical enigmas. Was it swallowed by the Soviet state, seized by foreign hands, buried in Siberia, waiting to be found? The answer may lie forever in silence. But one thing is certain. The lost gold of 1917 is more than a story of vanished wealth. It is a glittering ghost of a vanished empire. History's greatest mysteries are waiting to be uncovered. Don't miss the next story. Subscribe now to the Crit Stories and join us as we uncover the secrets the past tried to bury.